Welcome to Shadows of Eden. Tonight, we venture into the heart of darkness, where the line between the sacred and the profane blurs. I invite you to join me on this journey, but first tell me, where are you watching from? The streets, a cozy home, or somewhere darker? Before we dive into the nightmare, a warning. The following story contains disturbing imagery and topics that may not be suitable for all viewers. The following story is not just a symbol, it's a gateway, a window into a world where secrets are kept and horrors are hidden behind a veil of piety. Once, I was a seeker of forbidden knowledge, drawn to the abyss like a moth to a flame. But what I found, I can never forget. What began as innocent curiosity became a dance with the devil. A sanctuary turned into a theater of the macabre, where sacrifices were made in the name of a twisted faith. As we delve deeper into this tale, remember, the light of true faith can pierce the darkest shadows. But beware, for the darkness watches. I used to be into some dark stuff on the internet, the kind that crawled into your soul and stayed there. Now I can't even look at a computer without feeling sick to my stomach. The glowing window into digital infinity feels like a gateway to hell. My obsession with the macabre started when I was 12. My friend, Luke, introduced me to it. He came from a family that had the kind of wealth that bought secrecy. Luke's house was a mansion, complete with an indoor pool and a 4-digit key code. Despite his privileges, Luke was insufferable. He'd flaunt his wealth and the latest gadgets his parents bought him, always with a smug look. But I endured his antics for the perks of living the high life during those weekends at Casa de Luke. One weekend, Luke showed me a secret room in his basement. Behind a bookshelf, there was a hidden door leading to a darkened chamber lit only by the eerie glow of multiple computer screens. This was where Luke kept his most prized possession, a collection of videos and digital relics that catered to the darkest corners of the human psyche. Luke's father was a powerful man in the community, known for his charitable donations to the local church. But Luke hinted at a darker side, suggesting his father was involved in something far more sinister. One night, while Luke was showing off his digital collection, he got a call and left me alone in the room. My curiosity got the better of me, and I started browsing through his files. One video caught my eye, the ritual. The video started with a scene inside a lavish church. The congregation, dressed in white robes, chanted in unison. At the center of the room was a stone altar with a massive wooden cross behind it, lit by flickering candles. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the screen. It was Luke's father, dressed in a black robe, standing next to the altar. He began to speak in a deep, commanding voice, quoting scripture with a twisted fervor.
As it is written, and no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. We, the chosen, are the bearers of this light, the true interpreters of God's will.
The congregation responded in eerie, synchronized chants. The camera panned to a young woman, bound and gagged, being dragged to the altar. The look of terror in her eyes was unmistakable. Luke's father continued his sermon, his voice rising in intensity.
By offering this sacrifice, we cleanse ourselves of sin and draw closer to the divine truth. For it is through pain and suffering that we achieve true purity.
He raised a gleaming silver knife, etched with biblical verses twisted into ominous meanings. As he chanted, The congregation's fervor reached a fever pitch. The knife descended, and the woman's eyes widened in horror. Her scream was muffled by the gag, her body convulsing as the blade tore through her flesh. Blood splattered on the altar, the crimson droplets glistening in the candlelight. The camera didn't fade to black. It lingered, capturing every gruesome detail. Her eyes rolled back, her life slipping away in agonizing seconds that felt like hours. Her body twitched, then fell still, her blood pooling around her, a stark contrast against the white robes of the congregation. But it didn't end there. Luke's father stepped back, allowing the camera to capture the next horrifying act. Members of the congregation approached, holding gleaming tools. One by one, they began to dismember the lifeless body, methodically cutting off limbs with sickening precision. The sound of flesh and bone being severed was accompanied by the low hum of their chants. They placed the severed parts on the altar, arranging them in a grotesque display of devotion. The camera zoomed in, showing the brutal handiwork in excruciating detail. The dismembered limbs, the head placed atop the altar, eyes still wide in a frozen scream. Just as the video ended, the door creaked open, and Luke's father stood there, his face a mask of calm menace. He saw the video paused on the screen and gave me a chilling smile.
Curiosity can be dangerous, my child,
he said, his voice a sickly sweet whisper.
But perhaps it's time you learned the truth.
Before I could react, I felt a sharp prick in my neck. Darkness enveloped me. I awoke in a dimly lit room, tied to a chair. The walls were lined with religious iconography, but each depiction was twisted, perverted. Crucifixes with inverted crosses, stained glass windows showing scenes of torment rather than salvation. Luke's father entered, followed by the congregation, all wearing their white robes. He approached me, his eyes gleaming with a fanatic light.
You have seen too much,
he said.
But you also have potential. You could be one of us.
They began to chant, the same haunting hymn from the video. Luke's father produced the silver knife and held it up, the blade catching the candlelight.
Will you join us in our quest for purity?
I struggled against my bonds, but they were too tight. The chanting grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. The knife hovered closer, and I felt the cold steel against my skin. In that moment, I did the only thing I could think of. I closed my eyes and prayed, not to their twisted deity, but to the God I remembered from my childhood, the God of love and mercy. Please, I whispered, save me. There was a sudden crash and the chanting stopped. I opened my eyes to see Luke bursting into the room, his face a mask of panic.
Dad, stop! The police are outside!
Chaos erupted. The congregation scattered, and Luke's father dropped the knife, his face contorted in rage. Luke quickly untied me, and we ran through the darkened halls, the sounds of sirens growing louder. We burst out into the night, just as the police stormed the mansion. Luke and I were taken to safety, and the cult was dismantled. His father was arrested, along with many members of the congregation. In the aftermath, Luke and I drifted apart. The trauma of that night lingered, but I found solace in returning to my faith, seeking redemption for the dark curiosity that had led me to that place. The internet, once a gateway to hellish obsessions, now serves as a reminder of the light I almost lost. And though the scars remain, I hold on to the hope that even in the darkest places, a glimmer of divine mercy can still be found. Weeks later, I received an anonymous email. It contained a single video file. Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The screen flickered to life with a familiar scene. The same church, the same altar. But this time, the room was empty. The camera panned to the altar where another woman, bound and gagged, lay terrified. A voiceover began, one I recognized all too well. Luke's father's voice, calm and authoritative, narrated the scene.
This is our latest offering, a testament to the unwavering faith and the pursuit of purity.
The video cut to a close-up of the woman's face, her eyes wide with fear. The camera lingered there for a moment before cutting to Luke, standing next to the altar, a knife in his hand. His face was a mask of resolve, devoid of the panic I had seen the night the police raided the mansion.
As it is written, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. But the path to mercy is paved with sacrifice. We are the chosen, the ones who will bring about the new dawn.
The knife descended, and the camera zoomed in on the woman's face, capturing every detail. Her eyes bulged, and a scream tore through the gag. The blade sliced through her flesh, blood spurting out in a gruesome arc. Her body convulsed, each spasm a desperate, futile attempt to escape the pain. The camera held steady, recording every agonizing moment as life drained from her eyes. Her final breath was a gurgling choke, blood bubbling from her mouth. The video didn't cut away, lingering on her lifeless body, her blood soaking into the altar, a macabre testament to their twisted faith. The congregation then moved in with their tools. They began the grisly work of dismemberment, the camera capturing every cut and tear, the sounds of bones snapping and flesh being ripped apart were almost drowned out by their chants. The woman's head was severed with a sickening crunch, her eyes frozen in a stare of eternal horror. The severed limbs were methodically placed around the altar, the head set in the center, creating a grotesque tableau. I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind reeling. Luke had taken his father's place, continuing the twisted legacy. The cult hadn't been dismantled, it had merely gone underground. A week after receiving the video, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street from my house. It was there every day, its tinted windows hiding the occupants. One night, I heard noises outside my window. I peered out to see figures in white robes, moving silently through the shadows. Panic gripped me, and I called the police. By the time they arrived, the figures were gone, and the SUV had vanished. The police found no evidence, no trace of the intruders. They dismissed it as a prank, but I knew better. The cult was watching me, waiting. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind sent my heart racing. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, trapped by fear. I began to notice things out of place. A window left open, a door unlocked. They were sending a message. We can get to you anytime. One night, I woke to find my bedroom filled with the scent of burning incense. A figure stood at the foot of my bed, a white-robed figure holding a candle. The light flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls.
Join us,
The figure whispered.
or face the wrath of the divine.
I screamed and the figure vanished. The police found no signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone being there. They suggested I see a therapist, but I knew the truth. The cult was real, and they were coming for me. Desperate, I reached out to a priest, Father O'Connor, who had a reputation for dealing with the occult. He listened to my story with a grave expression.
This is no ordinary cult.
He said,
They have twisted the word of God for their own purposes. We must confront them with the light of true faith.
Father O'Connor performed a blessing on my house and gave me a crucifix to wear. He warned me to stay vigilant and promised to keep me in his prayers, but it wasn't enough. One evening, as I was returning home, I noticed the black SUV parked a few houses down. I hurried inside, locking every door and window. I paced the living room, clutching the crucifix, my mind racing. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest.
Open up, or we'll come in.
A voice called out. It was Luke. I backed away from the door, my hands trembling. The banging grew louder, more insistent. Then, the door burst open, and Luke, along with several robed figures, stormed in. They grabbed me, their grip unyielding, dragging me out into the night. They took me to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place was filled with the same eerie chanting I'd heard in the videos. At the center of the room was a stone altar, just like in the church. They tied me to the altar, the cold stone pressing against my back. Luke stood above me, his eyes devoid of the boyish charm I once knew. He held the silver knife, its blade glinting in the dim light.
You could have joined us,
He said, his voice hollow.
but now you'll serve as an example.
The congregation chanted louder, their voices echoing off the walls. Luke raised the knife, his face a mask of grim determination. I closed my eyes, clutching the crucifix, praying for a miracle. Just as the knife descended, there was a deafening crash. The warehouse doors flew open, and Father O'Connor burst in, holding a cross aloft.
Begone, servants of darkness.
He shouted, his voice filled with righteous fury. The robed figures recoiled, hissing like serpents. Luke hesitated, the knife trembling in his hand. Father O'Connor advanced, his cross shining with a blinding light.
By the power of Christ, I command you to release him.
The congregation wailed, their chants turning into screams. Luke dropped the knife, his face contorted with rage and fear.
This isn't over.
He spat, before fleeing with the others. Father O'Connor untied me, his hands shaking.
You're safe now.
He said, his voice softening. But I knew better. The cult was still out there, and they would come for me again. As we left the warehouse, I glanced back at the altar. The memory of that night seared into my mind. Father O'Connor took me to a safe house, where I stayed under his protection. He taught me about the true power of faith and how to defend myself against the darkness. But the fear never truly left me. Months passed, and I tried to rebuild my life. But I knew that somewhere, Luke and his cult were watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The glowing cross I once feared had become a symbol of hope, a beacon in the darkness. But the shadows were always there, lurking, waiting to reclaim me. And as I stared into the flickering candlelight, I knew that my battle with the cult was far from over. Months turned into years, and though the fear had dulled, it never fully disappeared. I kept in close contact with Father O'Connor, who continued to support and protect me. I moved to a new city, changed my name, and tried to start over. Yet in the back of my mind, I always knew they would come for me again. One cold winter night, as I was returning home from work, I felt a familiar chill. The streets were deserted, the silence eerie. My breath fogged the air, and I hurried my steps, clutching my coat tighter. As I approached my apartment building, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was Luke. Before I could react, two more figures emerged and grabbed me. They dragged me into a van, muffling my screams with a cloth soaked in a sweet-smelling liquid. Darkness swallowed me. When I awoke, I was back in the warehouse. The altar loomed above me, but this time the setting was different. The walls were lined with candles, their flames casting grotesque shadows. The chanting was louder, more frenzied, and at the center of it all was Luke, his eyes burning with fanatic zeal.
You escaped us once, but not again.
He said, his voice filled with unholy glee. They tied me to the altar, tighter than before. My heart pounded, and I struggled against the restraints, but it was no use. Luke held the silver knife, its blade catching the light. "This is the will of the divine," he intoned, raising the knife high. In that moment, I remembered Father O'Connor's teachings. I closed my eyes and began to pray, calling on the true power of faith. The chanting grew louder, and I felt a strange warmth fill my chest. The knife came down, but it stopped inches from my skin. A brilliant light filled the room, and I heard the screams of the cult members. The bonds around my wrists and ankles snapped, and I felt a hand pull me up. It was Father O'Connor, his face serene and filled with a divine glow.
"Leave this place and never return,"
he commanded, his voice echoing with authority. The cult members fled, their screams fading into the night. Luke stood frozen, his face twisted with rage and disbelief.
You cannot stop us.
He hissed.
We will find you. We will always find you.
Father O'Connor raised the cross, and Luke staggered back, his skin smoking where the light touched him. With one final scream, he vanished into the shadows. The light faded, and Father O'Connor turned to me, his face weary but kind.
"It's over,"
he said softly, but I knew better. The cult's grip on the town was broken, but their twisted faith remained. As Father O'Connor led me out of the warehouse, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. We returned to the church, where Father O'Connor blessed me and the crucifix I still wore. "Keep this with you always," he said. "It will protect you." In the days that followed, the town began to heal. The church cult's influence waned, and people started to speak out about their experiences. The police launched an investigation, and several cult members were arrested. But Luke and the others remained at large, their whereabouts unknown. I tried to move on with my life, but the scars ran deep. The memories of that night haunted me, and I knew that somewhere the cult was still out there, watching, waiting. One evening, as I was preparing for bed, I noticed something on my bedside table. It was a black candle, the same kind the cult used. My heart raced, and I picked it up, finding a note underneath. "We will return." I clutched the crucifix and whispered a prayer, hoping for the strength to face whatever came next. The battle was far from over, but I had faith that I could endure. As I blew out the candle, plunging the room into darkness, I felt a strange sense of calm. The light of true faith burned brighter than any shadow, and I was determined to keep it alive. But deep down, I knew the cult's obsession with beheadings and dismemberments was not just a twisted ritual. It was a reminder of the darkness that lurked in the human soul. And as long as that darkness existed, the fight against it would never truly end.